Welcome back to the Healthy Anger Toolbox. I'm Marty Wolner, and today my guest is Body-Mind Therapist Brian Maierhofer, and we're going to talk a little bit about hopefully things we can do in terms of our central nervous system and using our mind and body to help us stay regulated when we start to get into that heat of an emotional moment. Welcome to the show, Brian.
Thank you so much, Marty. Yeah, super grateful to be here and looking forward to chopping it up with you.
So tell me a little bit about a body-mind therapist. Tell me a little bit about the work that you do.
Yeah, so that term body mind comes from Candace Pert, who is kind of referred to as the goddess of neuroscience. And she was a female neuroscientist back when the field was highly dominated by men. And her team, they are the ones who discovered neuropeptides, which are, these little molecules. I'm not a neuroscientist, so I'm not going to go too deep into the explanation, but these transmitters, these neuropeptides that really actually communicate our emotions through our endocrine system. And so it really went against this sort of Cartesian split of which we operated from for a long time, in which that the mind and the body have this big gap in between of them. So it really highlighted the interconnectedness of the mind body system, or really the body mind system. I studied depth psychology. I'm a Jungian guy, Carl Jung at heart. And so I always encourage people not to underestimate the power of the subconscious or the unconscious, which really exists in our body. My understanding and my belief is that in many ways that this deeper part of our mind is actually running the show way more so than our more cognitive prefrontal cortex. And so that's why I put body mind ahead of mind body.
And so it really kind of shifts people's belief systems a little bit when they think that maybe there's a difference between the two and they're kind of separate, siloed off a bit. You're bringing awareness and deeper understanding of the fact that everything's intertwined. And in terms of how we can take care of the body and the mind, that there are ways that they're connected. And I also saw that you're into new wave healing. So that sounds like a break from traditional therapy. Tell me a little bit about that.
My interest has really taken me from traditional talk therapy into some of these more neuroscience based modalities. I really believe in the interconnectedness of biology, physiology, right, and our psychology. And so, on top of talk therapy, which the efficacy is super valued, I'm not against it. But there are so many other modalities that are presenting themselves these days that can involve a little bit more tech, such as something like vagus nerve stimulators or transcranial magnetic stimulation. But in many ways, there's also a bit of a return to a lot of ancient wisdom that is present as well. We see a lot of the tech and some of the science that's coming out is really mirroring a lot of ancient wisdom and indigenous practices as well. So when I say new wave healing, it's really about just adopting a new paradigm that opens us up to all sorts of different modalities, different fields of study. I think physics can inform therapy in so many different ways. And so how can we be a little bit more holistic and inclusive in our approach in ways that are both modern and archaic as well?
Wow. So you're bringing in a lot of different voices and perspectives in terms of healing and different ways that people can connect and bring it all together in a holistic way. You bring up an interesting point in terms of talk therapy and understanding the value of that being top down. And you're really advocating bottom up. You're really advocating from the body up, from the subconscious up, and those types of techniques. And like you said, you're calling it new wave, but it really goes beyond the traditional talk therapy from top down. And I guess the ultimate is to be able to combine the two, is to be able to have the top down strategies and techniques, but also the bottom up for that holistic healing. So that seems very fascinating. When we think about talk therapy and how much focus maybe and attention comes on talk therapy and some of those top down techniques, people get conditioned into that and they can get conditioned into the thinking patterns. A lot of times I even have a mantra, quite frankly, Brian, get out of my mind, get into my body. How can I stop the thinking and reduce the thinking? And for me, sometimes overthinking and start to attune and really focus on my body and my breathing and my muscles and a lot of that subconscious stuff. Getting out of the thinking piece, and especially for us overthinkers, and getting into our body and focusing on our body is a shift. It feels like a shift in the belief systems for some people in terms of understanding the effectiveness of that.
Absolutely, definitely. And that's again why I like that term body mind, because even in just in that simple pattern interrupt, I think it can do something to the approach. And I love what you said too of being able to combine the top down with the bottom up, right? And so if we're approaching it from both avenues, eventually it's going to meet in some sort of cohesion within the place in the middle. And I think that in talk therapy, there actually are some wonderful bottom up components as well. I mean, one of the things that is irreplaceable within that therapeutic relationship is the relational component, right? The neuroception of how our nervous systems communicate to one another as a bottom up approach as well. And so in the work that I do that is more somatically oriented, that is the entry point. But then as arousal increases and with that certain emotions, maybe memories, sense memories, etc., things come up as a part of that regulatory process. I think a top-down approach, something like CBT, some cognitive restructuring, is really helpful when we're live in the experience as it's coming through you, as you're having a somatic release and you have thoughts and feelings and stories and narratives and perceptions associated. That's when something like CBT and the cognitive restructuring can be really helpful live in that exact moment as we're trying to return back to our homeostasis.
Yeah, and I'm going to just back you up a little bit because you mentioned something there that got me into another thinking process, Brian, in terms of relationships being so regulating. Understanding that when we get emotionally dysregulated, how important it is to have those healthy relationships, because that can be the most regulating tool we can have is someone to be able to connect with in a safe way, a safe regulating way. So how important that is, especially going through any type of intense emotional struggle or certainly any type of trauma in a history, understanding the value of healthy relationships and how that helps our nervous system to be able to have someone in our lives who we can trust and feel safe with to connect with to help regulate us.
Absolutely. Yeah. Can't underestimate the impact of that. And we cannot also underestimate the ability for our relationships to be dysregulating as well. Nervous systems, in so many ways, they are magnets for other people's nervous systems, right? And whether the magnet is a maladaptive pattern or attachment or something more adaptive, people make kind of the joke, oh, the most powerful person in the room is the storyteller, the whatever. I'm like, oh no, the most powerful person in the room is the person who has the most safety in their body, the
Mm.
most regulated, because there is something mammalian that happens within our subconscious or unconscious when we're in a new space, when we're in novel territory. Our bodies automatically reach out to stabilizing forces, other people in our vicinity. And in so many ways, and this can be both positive and challenging in ways, we can outsource our sense of safety to another person as well. So the magnetic quality of the nervous system, and again, that term neuroception, that ability to sort of cross-regulate is extremely powerful.
How we try to promote regulation in terms of who we have around us and the relationships we have around us, because that takes us to the next step. We can be intentional about who we're connecting with and who we have around us, because, like you said, emotions are contagious and we can become magnets to different types of emotions and other people's nervous systems. And then there's the part of the brain, the amygdala, is constantly scanning and connecting with other people's amygdalas. That whole mirroring and understanding the interoception, what you're saying, and how the people around us are impacting that. And what power do we have to influence that? Can we actually have some sort of power and choice as to who we connect with and how we judge relationships and safety? You bring up another great point, how relationships are a two-sided coin, Brian, right? And so relationships can damage people and exacerbate their stress, even traumatize people, but they also can be healing and healthy on the other side as well. And how can we
Mhm.
decide to be able to figure out how to be able to surround ourselves with people who can actually lift us up and maybe regulate us to a point where we can get to a place of understanding ourselves and be able to connect with others?
The first thing that comes to mind that is incredibly important is the power of differentiation, emotional differentiation, right? So we as humans, we are designed to be interdependent. There's a lot of emphasis here in the West on your independence, being independent. Nobody can rob you of your independence. But for me, independence isn't the goal. It is actually interdependence. But there's a catch because in order to be interdependent, you have to be emotionally independent in many ways, emotionally differentiated, right? Some of these patterns within the nervous system, for example, a pattern of enmeshment, which is just a lacking of emotional and psychic boundaries, right? Your emotion and psychic energy becomes enmeshed with another person, and then you have a hard time differentiating your authentic feelings, your authentic states with those around you, or their feelings or states, or your perception of their feelings and states. And so very often people can place greater emphasis unconsciously on other people's emotional life around them, under this reality that their life is more real than their own authentic feelings. So the first step in that process of differentiation is really emotional literacy, and being able to really identify your authentic feelings and differentiate, separate from your perception of somebody else's feelings and states.
So, are there tools, Brian, that you can suggest how to do that if we first notice that perhaps we need to differentiate? What do we do? How do you start to begin that process of understanding and having that emotional independence?
I really like to think of change in sort of any capacity falls along these three steps. And they're not super radical, but again, don't underestimate the power of them, right? And so the first step is simply awareness. And so being able to really name and identify separate emotions and also their corresponding physical component and sensation, right? So when we're feeling connected, when we're feeling experiences of love or intimacy, perhaps we feel really expansive in our body. We feel really grounded. We feel our feet on the floor. Our sensory experience is more alive. We taste the food, we smell the candle, right? And so the first step is just developing the literacy of being able to identify the emotional state and the physical somatic corresponding experience. From that, we want to move into acceptance of our challenges and the shortcomings, acceptance of who and what we are, combined with our desire to grow into what we could be. And this is where a lot of people, I think, get hung up, because it's more of an abstract process in this acceptance. They very quickly want to jump from awareness into an action. Let's do something about it, right? And then we end up bypassing the deeper emotional patterning that can exist underneath, right? And so that is more of an alchemical process that requires a lot of space, emotional space, low stimulus, can be meditative and relational, and how you're really opening yourself up to different beliefs around these emotions and why they may be there, why these experiences may be there. And so that first step, awareness; second step, acceptance. And then this moves us into our step 2.5, which is actually this crucial sort of half step, which is where I encourage folks to identify and lean into resources and interventions, right? Interventions are stuff outside of yourself. You can intervene and put yourself in a position to get new knowledge, new education, see an expert in anger management like you, see a therapist. Or our resources, which are our inner tools of grounding, nervous system regulation. And so these two half steps are really designed to make sure our third step, which is action, come from a grounded place where we're not enmeshed in our own emotions. We're not being reactive. It allows us to create a little bit of emotional distance, right? So then from that action, we can decide what it is that we can do about the situation, and also decide where inaction is going to be our best tool. Sometimes life has a way of providing clarity if we simply do nothing. Circumstances change, feeling change. Perhaps our greatest benefit isn't always in rigorous action, but it can also be in pause and inaction as well, and let life reveal itself. So we have awareness, we have acceptance, we have our little half step. Do we need to lean into some resources? Do we need to lean into some interventions, maybe some outside help? And then boom, can I decide and differentiate what it is that is in my locus of control and what it is that is beyond that proximity?
So let's take anger. I appreciate that step by step. So let's take anger through that, and let's take explosive anger. Let's take someone who expresses their anger in a raging way, and now they get into an angry situation at work, and raging is going to have consequences and impact. And so let's take it through the step by step. So how could, as an individual now, how do I become aware of when I'm angry and share that with me?
So the first thing that I would really suggest in looking at any type of emotion, again, we're talking about anger, there is a sort of systemic structure and function, a chain link reaction that is taking place that lead up to the explosiveness. And a big part of that, our body is going to give us cues as to when we may be getting close to that state or crossing over some sort of threshold where then we lose the power of choice, right? And so, for example, people may hold specific patternings of anger in their body, perhaps before they even recognize they're angry or that explosiveness comes out. They may feel some sensation, some tightness in their throat. They may notice that their hands tighten up and clench up. So again, this is all that awareness process. And this is always done in retrospect, at least initially, until we can begin these sort of like in time real awareness and identification of the experiences, right? And so for example, let's say very often before I find myself in that state, I notice that I'm clenching my hands a lot or I'm biting my fingernails. I feel tightness in my neck, right? And so then the hope is that we would then be able to lean into some type of a resource to relieve that tension, increase blood flow into the neck, into the hand, into the chest, wherever it may be, so that we can create pattern disruptors. And so it may not mean that you're no longer going to feel angry, but the hope is that you don't cross over a threshold so where you no longer have choice in the expression of that anger.
Really what it boils down to, Brian, is start to become a body sensory detective, where you're trying to pick up body sensation changes early, because the earlier we can sense that we're starting to get emotionally activated and get angry, if we can catch it early, then hopefully we can be more effective. Because once it then becomes an angry episode or we get into that rage, it can be a little tougher to then reel it back and do something about it, because our nervous system is just charged and activated at that point. So I appreciate that. And so now how do I move on to acceptance? So now I feel it in my body, and now I sense, let's say going back to that example, I'm in a work situation and someone has said something or I've experienced something that's making me angry, and now I'm aware of it. How do I then move on to acceptance?
A big part of this for me within the acceptance, and this is where things can get like a little bit more therapeutic in nature, is we want to identify the emotional complexes that surround our relationship to anger. And so an emotional complex is a constellation of energy that exists beyond our own ego, beyond our own conscious awareness, that can come in and hijack ourselves at any given time. You can call these triggers. I don't love that word. I prefer the term sort of complexes. And they really fall under three categories. We have cultural complexes, cultural narratives around anger, around healthy expressions of anger, of what it looks like, the permissiveness of anger, right? We have familial complexes, modeling from our parents and whatever that may be, right? Family stories around the emotions. And then we have individual complexes as well, which may have more to do with our past experiences, et cetera. So this process of the acceptance is a little bit of excavation work. What are some of, and this is where maybe CBT can be helpful, right? What are some of the personal experiences, the cultural narratives, the family narratives, the associative memory that I have around my relationship to anger? And so this is useful so that when we do find ourselves in that state, we can accept and understand that something outside of us, bigger than us, some energy that wasn't connected to choice, has sort of reared its ugly head. We can begin to build a little bit more compassion within our own relationship to anger and understanding that these are mirror neurons working. This is how my father approached and expressed his relationship to anger, etc. So we begin to accept and simultaneously create distance from the pattern and from the function as well.
That's where hopefully we make the change, like you say, in those patterns of angry behavior. As we feel angry, how can we shift it to something healthy? How can we use that energy now that our nervous system has been activated? Someone has said something, or we're experiencing something that's lit us up a little bit. but we want to express it in a healthy way. We want to use that and express it in a healthy and constructive way. So hopefully we can continue this journey in terms of how do we shift and make that change.
Let's talk about like resources a little bit, right? And so these are kind of inner tools that we have, right? Which are often very connected to our interoception, which is our ability to identify, recognize our own internal bodily signals, right? So somatic tracking is a wonderful way to do that, right? Just simply putting your awareness on the somatic experience. Again, if it's before an explosiveness, there's a tightness in the throat, there's a tension in the throat, right? How can I create a little bit of blood flow to that? Maybe I'm doing some facial stretching or something like that, right? Maybe I'm doing some lymphatic sort of massage, some drainage, moving the neck around. Just if you can approach and manage and create shift in the what of the experience, and the what being the expression in the body, very often we don't really need to understand the why or intellectualize the why. The why can dissipate if we can approach and take care of the what, right? So there's wonderful breathing exercises. I like bilateral nostril breathing. So you're inhale in one nose, you close the other one, exhale out, inhale back in, exhale out, going back and forth can really build some of that coherence within the brain hemispheres. There's grounding, getting some sunlight, putting your feet in grass. And this is where it can be a little alchemical and creative. Whatever it is that makes you feel more in your body and more in the space around you. Because when your sympathetic nervous system is activated, what's going on here is that there's all of this energy that exists just beyond your body. And so, like a sponge, your nervous system sucks it in, and suddenly all the energy is inside of you, right? This is why a 13-year-old girl can lift a car off of her mother who's stuck or et cetera, right? Because the nature of the sympathetic is that it pulls energy from the space around you into your body and gives you this heightened sense of energy. And so the antidote, the solution of that, is actually finding ways to diffuse that energy into the space around you. And this is where something like our proprioception can be really useful. So if the interoception is our awareness of our internal bodily signals, our proprioception is our ability to navigate and feel the space around your body as your body's moving through space. So that's a lot of fancy words, similar to what you spoke on before, right? If you're out of the head and in the body, I always think it's kind of funny too, if you see somebody at a grocery store and they're like zoning out and they're like, oh, that person's in outer space, but they're actually in like inner space. They're in their own head. And the goal is to get out and into space. The more your body can be relaxed and comfortable into space and kind of diffusing that energy into space, the better you're going to feel. So this is where breath to movement comes in. Breathing and moving through space, right? So like yoga, every time you lift your hands above your head, you're breathing in. Every time you come back down, you're breathing out, right? So breath to movement is really helpful. Even like something like dancing. How can you increase your body's relationship to the space around you? That is going to be incredibly grounding for the nervous system.
After you get through that acceptance, understanding the resources, and as we move in terms of outside stuff, interventions, what would be some examples perhaps in that situation if I needed to take that step?
I personally am like a huge fan of resource groups, whether it's going to some sort of a 12-step program or a community, a group of people who are undergoing the same process, same struggles, same challenges. There's something that happens, the osmosis of that space is super useful. So I always encourage people to find some sort of process group, whether it's a men's group, whether it's one-on-one therapy, group therapy, 12 steps, something like that. So when I say interventions, I mean kind of more specific, like outside support, outside help. But it can also be something as simple as picking up the phone and calling someone, right? Calling a family member, calling a friend. What are these interventions? How can I lean on any knowledge outside of my own awareness that may help me in that moment?
So we need to find people who get it, people who understand what we're going through, the struggles, the stresses, maybe even they have similar experiences, they've walked that walk. And if they can get what I may be going through or experiencing, that can help me understand it better to come up with solutions and healthier outcomes. So appreciate that. So now we move on to action. So when we think about healthy anger expression, assertive communication, and when we think about what we can do in terms of body mind, so some of the strategies and some of the somatic tools, I've done my breathing. I've accepted it. I've moved on. Let's say I didn't need a lot of intervention and outside research, but I used a lot of my inner stuff that I was able to stay calm. And now I want to express myself to this person in a healthy way. What kind of somatic tools in terms of how I present? A lot of times for me, I talk faster than I want to talk. I talk louder than I want to talk. And how can I use my mind and body and be able to have that connection to be able to communicate and express the anger in a healthier way? Any thoughts on that?
This is going to be paired with some education that's really important around boundary setting, around communication, around codependency, people pleasing, some of these more relational challenges that come up. So whether it's in therapy or you read a good book or whatever, but just creating better understanding is just discernment, really, right? Around boundaries, around communication. And you want to create pattern interrupts in certain ways, and relational ways are some of the most powerful, right? And so I think one of the most healing and incredible things that we can do is have difficult conversations with those that we love. When it comes to anger, there's often a deeper hurt and a deeper emotion underneath it. And so can we, through the vulnerability and the courage, speak more authentically around our wounds, around our desires for respect, around our specific needs in relationship, right? That doesn't make you a needy person, it makes you a human. And so to tie in some of the somatic components, as we're thinking about having a conversation with a partner who hurt you in some way, or who overstepped, or maybe was disrespectful in some manner, sometimes in just thinking about having a conversation, you're going to notice immediate resistances that show up in your body as well, right? When you're thinking about it, when you're preparing for the conversation, once you sit down. That's why there's a cyclical nature to this whole thing, right? But can you lean into some of that somatic tracking? Can you create some of those interrupts within the physical experience of the body as you're getting ready to make a new relational choice? I think that beyond relationally, what happens very often for men is that anger can actually get turned and directed inward. So if you think about the nervous system, and so like anger is going to be some sympathetic arousal. And eventually, if we don't deactivate it, release that energy in some way, because that's what big explosions are, right? They're a release of that energy, of that arousal energy. And so we want to be able to prevent ourselves from crossing over this threshold of overwhelm into hypoarousal, which is shutdown. And so when that shutdown happens, that anger gets projected inward. And that's this kind of self-loathing, this negative self-talk, this sense of victimization. And it can deconstruct the body from the inside out, right? And it doesn't look like anger on the surface, but underneath it, there's a deeper sense of anger, victimization, self-loathing that is going on, but it's all directed inward. So anger can be very much directed outward relationally or inward against ourselves. I fully believe that anger, the force, the energy, the life-giving libido energy is actually a very positive thing. And a man who can't express his anger and a man who is explosively angry actually in many ways are still dominated by anger. It's two sides of the same spectrum. So it's really about holding the tension between the two. And can I find that third option, the place in the middle, right? Where I can be comfortable in voicing that I'm angry and I'm upset and that you hurt me and that there's something here, there's an experience that's valid. And can we talk about that experience as opposed to the anger? Because also the anger in itself can, in many ways, be a deflection and a distraction, especially when we're talking about relationally, from the experience underneath it. And so maybe the presentation on the outside is anger, but in many ways, it's a way to bypass the actual deeper experience underneath. So can I speak to the experience underneath with my chest held high, with my head forward, in a manner that is really clear, discerning, and respectful and assertive in an appropriate way, but that comes from a place of self-honoring, not from a place of control, looking to retaliate, whatever it may be.
And that's a process. You bring up some great points with that, Brian. And the last one there you were talking about in terms of finding out what's underneath that someone's anger. Anger is that expression, but really trying to figure out as a secondary emotion, what's the primary emotion? And a lot of that is trauma based as well. And for some people to do their shadow work, to really look back their inner work and figure out what may be stored in their subconscious from their previous experience, even childhood experiences, and what may be causing them to be angry. But then also you bring up that third space. So you have your ragers on the one side that are expressing it outwardly, but in less than healthy ways. And then you have your stuffers on the other side. I have a lot of leaders I deal with who think they need to present themselves as calm. I got to stay calm. I have to stay calm. And what they're really doing is they're stuffing their anger, and they're going through a lot of internal stress and turmoil because they want to try to keep that calm demeanor, when authenticity and sharing in a healthy, assertive way as to why they're angry, what they expect, or what boundary has been crossed is a lot better for their body and their mind. And so really finding that third space of assertive anger, of ways that maybe some other behaviors and other ways to express anger are more commonly known, but to find the healthy space in between and give people the tools. A lot of the tools that I deal with, quite frankly, are external stuff, leaders and how they can actually express themselves and communicate their anger differently and in healthier ways. And so I'm fascinated with this conversation in terms of what's going on inside of our bodies and our nervous system. If we could actually put an X-ray on a leader who thinks they need to stay calm and need to stuff down all that emotion, what's going on, what cortisol is being released, what's going on with their heart, what's going on with their muscles, the oxygen being released to their brain, everything that's being impacted in their body and mind. If they actually were aware of that and knew that, that might have them have a different level of understanding that they might need to do something different. But uncovering those original emotions and really trying to figure out what anger may be masking is a process, and it's a journey. And for some, it's a brave and courageous process, because once you get into trauma and you got to bring up some old stuff and try to figure out why you may be sensitive in certain situations, what people say and different experiences, that can be a challenge to figure out what's going on underneath.
I work with a lot of young men, and most of the time, the men that I work with, they land on the stuffer side of things.
Mm, mm,
And so one of the subtle reframes that I offer people is shifting our sense of identity from a nice guy into a kind man. Because there's
mm,
a big difference between niceness and kindness. And sometimes kindness in a moment may not look so nice or may be hurtful in some ways, but there is a kinder intent and orientation and bigger picture along with it. And so I think a lot of where that anger comes from, especially for men and especially for young men, that's underneath the nice guy presentation. And some of this is a cultural complex, a familial complex, is that we have been conditioned to believe that niceness is actually currency, that it is a transactional, valuable thing, and that if we behave a certain way, if we're nice and good and do the right things, then we will get something as a result of that, out of love, out of work, out of life, right? And so what happens is that we subconsciously recognize that this promise isn't being fulfilled. This niceness, this goodness isn't, this placating, acquiescing, it isn't getting me what I want. And so as a result of that, resentment takes over. And it's this most insidious type of resentment that is very silent. And in many ways, it mirrors envy, because we make up the story that the other people who are behaving that way are getting what they want. They're, quote, getting away with it. And so we envy that. And why can't we? Why isn't that us? So then we get this terminal uniqueness that we're somehow different in some ways, maybe some sort of cosmic curse or whatever it is. And it's really this silent agreement that we have with life at large in understanding or falsely believing that our niceness is currency.
trying to empower ourselves with better intention to understand the difference and the distinction between that is important. So as we wrap things up here, Brian, in terms of understanding somatic tools that someone can use when they're feeling angry. We talked about a lot of stuff. One takeaway, what's your go-to? So when you get angry, when you find yourself in an angry situation, what's your go-to? What do you actually do in terms of body mind to stay regulated?
Kind of depends. There are moments when I lean into that and I take it to like the gym or like the jujitsu mat or something, and that can be really life-giving. But being a little bit more specific with it, and I touched on it already, but is, and it's kind of silly and funny, but facial stretching. So our emotional patterning, it holds the patterns of the fascia on our face. And so when we're angry, our face is going to automatically adopt its counterpart to that emotion, and we can hold the pattern. You see this in the world, right? Folks who are struggling with depression or anger, we can identify faces and have a sense of emotional patterning that goes on underneath it, right? And so on a superficial level, you scrunch your face. I just find ways to like open up that fascia and like open up the face, stick my tongue out, stretch it out, some of the lymphatic stuff, just ways that we can just create new neurological and somatic hardwiring within that pattern. So facial stretching is going to be really good. I've had many a times where I'm screaming into a pillow, I'm punching into a pillow. There's this idea of sacred rage as well, which is really important. In that our anger serves a function in so many different ways. And I think evolutionary back in the days probably served a greater function than it does today. Somatic shaking is really great too. So really feeling the energy, you're pulling it up through your feet and your knees and kind of shaking it here on top, maybe some humming while you're doing it, maybe break up your ribs a little bit, get that diaphragm open, sunlight, getting your feet in grass. I'm a big journaler. I journal every single day. There's literally thousands of them, but I love the facial stretching. That's a great one.
You are certainly walking the walk over there, Brian. So appreciate you. Grateful for that. I know you and I met each other on X and we've been communicating back and forth, but where else can we find some of your stuff if people are interested in trying to find out more about body mind therapy?
Yeah, brianmaierhofer.com. I have a weekly newsletter where I'm putting stuff out there. There's always practical tools in there as well. That's probably one of my favorite offerings and things that's completely free. You can read my work there. I do have some somatic psychology courses. I have two of them. They're specifically designed around releasing trauma from the mammalian brain, from the primitive brain through some involuntary movement. X is my main platform. You can find me at I am pro human. That's my company's name is Professional Human. It was something that my friends used to call me because I'd always be talking about life and spirituality. And one day my buddy was like, "You're just a professional human, man. You talk about
Wow.
it."
And I appreciate you. Thank you so much. Just so very grateful. And I'll make sure I put all that information in the show notes. But great conversation. Thank you, Brian Maierhofer. This has been a Healthy Anger Toolbox. Hope to see you again soon.